Welcome to today's webinar. Today, the vulnerable population that we are going to focus on is foster children. We'd like to go ahead and introduce our three moderators and our guest speaker today. Hannah, McCall, and I will be moderating and presenting information during today's webinar. Hannah will also be interviewing our expert guest, Matt. Here we have a quick overview of our schedule today. Our webinar is set to last approximately 12 to 15 minutes and is packed with both valuable information and intriguing segments. With that, we'll go ahead and have McCall take the lead and teach us some background about foster children as a demographic.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Just to give a little bit of a background, when we did a pre-poll to the class, the majority of our class thought that there were around 300,000 foster care children currently in the US, but there are actually 440,000 currently in the foster care system. And in Utah, there are 3,000. And another stat is that 6% of all children in the US will find themselves in foster care at some point before they turn 18. And another interesting point is that California has the largest population of foster care children with over 50,000. And just to note, the next highest state is New York with 20,000. So California has more than double the next highest state. And the median age of foster care children is 8 years old, and the majority are boys. The highest ethnicity demographic of foster care children are Black youth, and only 51% of foster care children graduate high school.
Great, McCall. Thanks for those stats. For my portion, we're going to be talking more about children experiencing mental health issues within the foster care system. Children in the foster care system are at a much higher risk for developing mental health issues than the country average. A child-based welfare project in Denver, Colorado, conducted a survey that showed that up to 80% of children in foster care had some kind of mental health issue compared to the 18 to 22% average of the rest of the country. Of the wide range of mental illnesses experienced by children in foster care, anxiety is the most prevalent. Generalized anxiety disorder can be identified by excessive, exaggerated anxiety and worry about everyday life events with no obvious reason for worry. Children and adults with generalized anxiety disorder have a hard time completing everyday tasks because of their constant sense of dread and worry. But why do foster children experience significantly higher rates of anxiety? This change can be explained by ACEs and epigenetics. ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, are negative experiences that a person has faced growing up. Studies show that 21.7% of children in the United States have experienced at least 2 ACEs in their developmental years. There is research lacking in the field of ACEs in foster children, but research suggests that the number of children in foster care experience 2 or more ACEs is much higher than the average. In studies focusing on each of these disparities separately, 70% of foster children reported a history of maltreatment, and 80% were exposed to violence and/or domestic violence. An additional 11% of children had one or more guardians that were cognitively impaired or otherwise unable to meet their needs. ACEs alter the way a person's brain works. This video will explain how.
We each inherit our genetic code, our genome, from our parents. Our genome is like an instruction manual made up of thousands of genes that tell our bodies how to grow and develop. But our experiences throughout life influence the way our bodies read and react to this instruction manual. And this is where epigenetics comes into play. Epigenetics is the study of how behaviors, environments, and our life experiences can affect the way our genes work. Just like the switches in an electrical box, our genes can be turned on and off. Some of our genes act as master switches. These genes can switch other genes on or off. Some genes have dynamic switches. These genes switch on and off frequently, like genes that exhibit a circadian rhythm and express changes over a predictable 24-hour cycle. Still, other genes have stable switches. These genes remain on or off throughout life. Epigenetics shows that social and environmental stimuli, the people, places, and things that a person interacts with, can switch certain genes on or off, altering the way our brains and bodies read our genetic code. And these epigenetic changes can have lasting impacts on our health, development, and behaviors.
As
We
mentioned in the
research our
video,
genetic
people, places, and things have a large impact on brain development. This is why ACEs have such a large and lasting impact on children. Thanks, Elizabeth, and back to you.
Thank you, Hannah. The best way for community members and healthcare professionals to help a vulnerable population like foster children is for us to understand what the most pressing needs and health disparities are. All right, it's time now for our expert interview. Today, McCall and Hannah will be interviewing Matt. Matt is a current senior at BYU. He was in foster care from ages 4 to 13 and was eventually adopted by his foster parents, something many foster children unfortunately never experience. His experience in foster care helped him to discover his current passion for public health. We have some interview questions prepared, but we welcome you to continue entering any questions that you have in the chat so that we can address them during our Q&A segment coming up soon. Matt, thank you for joining us today. Are you ready to begin?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great, Matt. To start things off, can you briefly describe what it was like growing up in foster care and any challenges you might have faced?
Yeah, so I went into foster care when I was pretty young. So many of the unique aspects of life that I experienced, I sort of thought were normal at the time. For example, I had to go for checkups more frequently, including visits to a psychiatrist, even though I didn't have any sort of diagnosed disorder. I also had different social workers and case managers who would come and visit me and ask me about how life was going. Eventually, when I started going to school, I realized that these parts of my life weren't common with my friends, so it wasn't always easy to relate to other people.
Interesting. And do you think it was easy for people to identify you as someone in foster care?
I think I actually blended in pretty well for the most part. I remember I had an art class where my teacher would read us books occasionally in elementary school, and one time she was reading us a book about foster children. And I remember I was excited because I feel like I knew a lot about it. And so our teacher asked us a question about the book, and I kind of just raised my hand and said, "Well, I'm in foster care." And my teacher said that like I shouldn't make jokes about that or something. And so I was really surprised that she would doubt me like that. So it didn't feel super great, but I guess it means that I didn't really stand out as a foster child.
Thanks for sharing that, Matt. Another question we have is, are there any stigmas out there that exist about foster children?
I would say that a lot of how foster children are portrayed in books and movies, they're kind of portrayed as like troublemakers or children with like behavioral disorders. Um, and while many foster children do fall under this category, we have to realize that these problems can probably be traced to some sort of trauma in their original home. Children are very vulnerable in their developmental years, so any problems that their parents might have caused during this time can stick around for a long time.
Totally. What other difficulties do foster children tend to deal with?
One issue that's particularly complex is parental rights. Children are placed in foster care, obviously, because there's some problem preventing their biological parents from taking care of them. Ideally, if the child wants to and the parent becomes able to, they can return to their original parents from foster care. But there are times where it's unlikely that the parents will be able to do this. And so uh, if the child wants to be adopted by other parents, the rights of their biological parents have to be terminated first. This can be a lengthy process going through the courts, especially if their biological parents don't want to give up their rights. So this can be a really big challenge for foster children.
Well, Matt, thanks for sharing that. We're going to ask you one final question, and that is, can you please explain why foster children would be considered a vulnerable population?
Yeah, so as I kind of alluded to before, foster children, being young, they're in the developmental stages still. And if the trauma they experienced in their original home isn't addressed properly while they're still young, it can have a really negative impact on them later in life. Children that experience abuse are specifically prone to developing PTSD and depression. And while many foster parents, they have good intentions, not all of them have all the tools they need to address this sort of problem with their foster children.
Wow, those were really great answers. Thank you, Matt. We will go ahead and conclude our interview. Thank you for your continued attention. We are almost done with today's webinar. We're just going to take a few minutes right now to address your questions during our Q&A session. McCall is going to take over and ask the questions that you have entered into the chat before you leave. Let's go ahead and begin.
Perfect. Okay, so the first question that we have is what actions healthcare professionals can take to reduce or prevent health problems and improve health, healthcare, and quality of life in this population? What are tips or specific recommendations for working with this population in healthcare or community settings?
Yeah, I can go ahead and address that question. The American Academy of Pediatrics actually updated their standards of care for children in foster care in 2021 by developing a multidisciplinary panel of experts to update it. The information is designed for care professionals as well as foster parents, social welfare agencies, members of the legal community, health insurance agencies, and also policymakers. These recommendations are detailed in 10 chapters and are designed with the intent of providing an integrated health care plan for each child or adolescent in foster care.
Awesome. And then another question is, are there government-based recommendations or policies for working with foster children?
Yes, that's an awesome question. There are. So the Administration for Children and Family supports implementation of the Family First Prevention Services Act through states, territories, and tribes submissions of the Title 4E prevention plans. And this policy is intended to provide trauma-informed, evidence-based mental health, substance abuse, and in-home parenting services, and supports to prevent unnecessary entry into foster care. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is also developing guidance to remind states about Medicaid's early and periodic screening, diagnostic, and treatment requirements for individuals under age 21. So this is an ongoing effort and will hopefully result in more extensive care and resources for foster children.
That's awesome to see that there are resources and that it's an ongoing thing. Okay, another question is, have many organizations seen success in their efforts to help foster children access resources for their mental health? And what makes these programs successful?
I can take this question. So we've seen some government-based programs like the Pediatric Mental Health Care Access Program. It enables pediatric primary care providers to consult with pediatric mental health specialists through teleconsultation to better diagnose, treat, and refer children and youth to services for mental health conditions and substance use disorders. For example, there's a nonprofit group in Northern California. They started a telehealth therapy program for foster children aged 12 to 18. Foster children normally receive mental health care through Medicaid, but they need a diagnosed disorder to qualify for this. So this program provides free weekly sessions for kids who wouldn't normally qualify or have access to a therapist in close proximity. The staff includes a diverse group of professionals who are able to help children to face the challenges that they have by being in foster care.
Awesome. Okay. And then our last question is, where can foster children and their foster families find help in Utah?
That's a great question. I'll take that one, McCall. So there are a lot of resources in Utah for foster families and the children that they are fostering. In a recent poll we conducted, we found that only 22% were aware of the Pediatric Mental Health Care Access Program, and 44% were aware of the Administration for Children and Family Program. So there's a lot of work to be done to raise awareness. But some other programs include the Fostering Healthy Children program, who is dedicated to providing primarily physical health programs to foster children. And a mental health resource is the RISE program through Utah's Child and Family Services Adoption Connection. RISE is a non-for-profit mental health organization that provides a variety of programs like after-school programs, fostering parenting classes, daily aid, and more for foster children and families.
Great. Those are really insightful questions. Thank you guys for asking them. I'm so glad that we had the chance to answer them. We hope that you will have, as you have more questions about foster children as a vulnerable population, that you'll be able to continue researching and learning more on your own. As with all of our webinars, we'll conclude with a quick quiz for you to self-test and see how much you learned.
Perfect. So yes, we are going to jump into our quiz. Feel free to follow along, and the answers will be at the end. And thank you so much for attending our webinar, and we will see you next time.